Hello, everyone. Welcome back to I See What You're Saying, the Disciplined Listening Podcast. I'm Michael Reddington, and here we are for our second installment of our new series where we spend some time really diving deeper on certain aspects of listening and communication and really developing skills, perspectives, and techniques we can apply in all of our high-impact conversations. And with the time we have today, we want to dive into some thoughts on what we can all do to truly become great listeners. Now, admittedly, if we're going to have an exhaustive conversation about this, we'd still be here next week. So for all of our sanity and the ability to just apply key concepts moving forward, we're really going to try to keep it focused today too. A few key concepts, share some critical research, talk about some core characteristics, and leave it at that. We'll build on it as we move forward. This isn't going to be a conversation about active listening. Believe me, we're going to have a couple of those very soon. But today, what we really want to do is focus on what can we do to really be great listeners in the conversations that matter the most. So first, let's take a step back and think about what listening really is. Listening is an outcome-focused activity. I'm going to come back to some research in a minute that really supports this. But when you think about how we engage with anybody at any time, the amount of effort, energy, attention, contextual awareness, alternative creation, willingness to accept what's going on around us, all of these things and more will depend on how valuable we believe the outcome is. As communicators, we often rise or fall to the level of our expectations. We'll come back to that in another conversation as well. But as we think about improving how we engage with others and improving how we communicate, one of the first things you want to do is elevate our expectations. If we can elevate our expectations, attach each interaction, especially the valuable ones, to our long-term goals, now we can start to give ourselves reasons to care and reasons to commit more energy. If we believe the outcome is valuable enough, we will commit more. If we don't, we will not only will we check out sooner, but we will look for reasons to check out sooner. A couple quick examples. You're a leader, someone's coming into your office, and initially we think, oh, how quickly can I get them out of my office? I'm busy. I've already told them 3 times. That's fair. I'm not going to tell you not to think that. But I am going to say that thought process torpedoes our ability to truly engage with them, listen for hidden intelligence, uncover hidden value, and solve problems that we might not even know exist just yet. Next time that person comes in and we think to ourselves, man, here they are again. How quickly can we get them out of our office? Right after thinking that, if we can pivot and think, okay, here they are again. How can I best use the next 5 minutes to make them more confident in their problem-solving skills so they stopped interrupting me? Now I have a greater reason to engage and participate in this conversation. That's just one example. A quick sanitized version of a story from an engagement I facilitated not too long ago. I had a participant about halfway through the day raise his hand and tell me that he was disappointed because he thought coming into that session, I was going to teach him how to be a better listener. I guess everyone can have their own thoughts and giggles at that. When I asked him specifically what was he referring to, he said, and I quote, for instance, with my wife, it takes her at least 15 minutes to say something that she could have said in 2, and I can't pay attention for the next 13 minutes. Those of you that know me know that sometimes my tongue gets out ahead of my brain. This was certainly one of those times. So I looked that guy right in the face and said, I can't teach you how to care. Thankfully, we're able to backpedal, salvage the relationship, and move on from there in the program. But the reality of the situation is if we don't have a reason to care, we're not going to listen. Whereas the next time we find ourselves in that situation, if we tell ourselves, okay, I need to pay attention because somewhere in here, I'm going to hear something that's important and unexpected. And I'll be able to use that in order to move this relationship or this initiative forward. So if we think about while we're listening, what are we supposed to be doing? Really great listeners are trying to execute 3 tasks at the same time. We're trying to build trust. And some of that's going to tie back into active listening. Again, we'll talk about that coming up at another time. But we're trying to engage with people at a level that builds trust within the relationship in this conversation. We're also trying to capture for intelligence. And when we come back another time, we're going to talk about the difference between capturing intelligence and check the box information. That's very important. The third thing we need to be doing is understanding how are we going to employ what we're learning to help us achieve our goals. Those could be goals related to a project or initiative, a relationship, something we're trying to motivate them to do, information we're trying to acquire, whatever it may be. So as listeners, we're constantly juggling and we're trying to build trust, acquire this intelligence, and then apply that intelligence to help us achieve our goals in the context of the situation. With that as a backdrop, when we think about, what is listening, what is the process of listening? There's different schools of thoughts on this, depending on who you believe is how many steps and in what order. But to distill it all down, we can say with a high level of confidence that listening essentially comes down to receiving, retaining, and interpreting information. Receiving, retaining, and interpreting information. In order to receive information, we have to have a clear mind, clear focus, and be open to receiving everything that's going on around us. We're going to come back one of these days and have a conversation about situational awareness to talk about how we can really improve that. Then we've got to retain it. Well, for us to retain it, it's got to have some sort of meaning, some sort of power, some sort of future value for us. Got to be able to tie it into goals. And then we need to interpret it, which comes back to that contextual and situational awareness. It also speaks to the importance of outcomes, because how we interpret all of the information we're receiving is going to depend heavily on the outcome we're trying to achieve at that point in time. As the outcome changes, how we interpret this information is going to change as well. So I've said a few times that listening is an outcome-oriented exercise. I was extremely fortunate on an earlier episode of this podcast. I highly recommend that you go find it, to have a conversation with Graham Bodey. And Graham Bodey is one of the premier academic researchers in the world of listening and communication. And when I was writing the disciplined listening method, I had the opportunity to be exposed to his research, to later have a conversation with him, which I was so grateful for. And there are so many things to learn from him and from his research. But what I want to share right now are what he and his team identified as the 4 goal-oriented listening styles. So essentially what they identified in their research is that as human beings, there are essentially 4 goal-oriented listening styles that we can apply in any given situation, in any given conversation. We have the ability, and likely have employed all 4 of them, yet each of us as individuals tend to default to one more often than the rest. And Graham, apologies for oversimplifying and summarizing all of your work, so I appreciate you bearing with me on that. Just to quickly touch on his 4 goal-oriented styles, the first one is relational. When somebody is more of a relational listener, no surprise, they're more in tune to what people are thinking and feeling as they're participating in the conversation. What are their emotions? The next type of goal-oriented listener is the analytical listener. Generally, an analytical listener wants to get the whole message first. Once they have the whole message, they can start working through it. These first 2 styles are generally more focused on the other person. What are they saying? What are they feeling? What's going on in their world? The next style is the task-oriented style. And for all of the leaders that I've had the privilege of working with, this tends to be their dominant default style. A task-oriented listener often loves to focus on staying on topic and staying on time. Tell me exactly what I need to know and tell me as fast as you can possibly tell me, so I can either make the decision I need to make or return to whatever else I was doing or wanted to do. We're going to come back to this, but please take this. Time is the enemy of empathy. Anytime we prioritize how fast we can complete an interaction over how much value we can get from an interaction, we are robbing everybody in this conversation the opportunity to maximize what we can provide each other. Task-oriented listeners, to be quite honest, a task-oriented listener in many ways can be a selfish listener. Now, there can be good and bad reasons for that. Please take that as much of a non-judgmental statement as possible. But if I want you to tell me what I think I need to know from you as fast as possible, this is all about me. It's not about you. The last one is the critical listener, and they tend to be a little bit more focused on the consistency and the accuracy of what somebody is saying, potentially because they're looking for an opportunity to correct them, to update them, maybe even to prove where they're wrong or they've missed a step. Again, that can be a very selfish listening style where I'm now providing or focusing on myself, what I want to experience in the role I need to play in this conversation. So when we look at the relational, the analytical, the task-oriented, and the critical listener, there is a time and place for all of them. And I highly recommend that you read Graham's research. I'll see if I can have him back on the show to dive more deeper into each one of these. And maybe we can even come back at another time and really parse out different applications for each. But remember, if we need information from somebody, we need a behavior change from somebody, they're in control of this conversation, not us, because at the end of the day, they're going to be the ones who makes the decision on what information is okay to share or what behaviors are okay to change and why. So if I'm focused on how fast you're doing it for me or how accurate and consistent you are, by the way, for all the investigators who are listening, often people who are telling the truth have inconsistencies in their story because of all the emotions that went with experiencing the event when it happened and recalling it, often under perceived pressure and stress. So if we're just listening for consistency, we could be distracting ourselves from the core element of what's really going on here to begin with. So I'm not going to stand here and say, always be relational, always be analytical, never be task-oriented. But I will beg you to use the right tool for the right job. We talked about this in the previous episode. A high impact conversation is generally determined by the value of the relationship and or the outcome. So depending on who we're talking to, what outcomes short and long term we're trying to achieve in the context of the situation, now we can choose the best available listening style to make sure we're oriented towards the right goal. So we're now employing the proper levels of energy and focus and alternative creation, empathy, and on and on and on to create the cooperation that we need in the conversation. So again, I highly recommend you check out Graham's research, but that in and of itself is a wonderful summarization about why listening is an outcome-focused exercise. And if our outcomes aren't right, we could be using the wrong technique, the wrong mindset, which means we could be off course from the very beginning. And all too often, we blame other people for problems that we created in our conversations or interactions. So if we want to take accountability for the information and the intelligence that we receive, if we want to take accountability for the relationships that we create, we want to take accountability for the outcomes that we achieve, both successes and missed opportunities. If we want to take accountability for all that, then we really want to take a step back and say, okay, what are the characteristics of great listeners? What are they doing differently? What are they showing the ability to do when conversations matter the most, when the relationships are important, when the outcomes are important? What are they doing differently? And again, if we put together a list, we could be here for a couple of days. But to focus on a half dozen of the top characteristics of great listeners that we can all learn to employ in our high value conversations inside and outside of work, let's start with developing a strong sense of curiosity. Because there is always something we don't know. There's always something that we don't understand. Anytime we feel like we've got it all figured out, I'm pretty sure an angel loses its wings. We fall into a validation mentality. We're no longer in a learning mentality. If we can force ourselves to stay curious, what am I missing? What don't I understand? What else could they be thinking? What else could they be feeling? What else could be impacting this situation? On and on. Great listeners force themselves to develop a strong sense of curiosity. They also develop the ability to limit their internal monologue. Talking is the most important part of listening. Talking is the most important part of listening. If we're talking, it's going to be really hard to listen. That's true if I'm talking externally to somebody else because I'm talking over them, cutting them off. I'm not giving them a chance to talk, but it's especially true when we're talking to ourselves. We can only listen to one voice at a time. And if our internal voice is going the same time somebody else's voice is going, you know damn well which voice we're focusing on. We're focusing on our own. Which means even if we feel like we're getting the gist of the message that we're receiving, we're missing some nonverbal behaviors, we're missing tone, we're missing specific word choice, maybe there's some pauses, some changes in volume, speed of delivery, all of these things that we're not picking up on because we're stuck in our own internal monologue. And there's a good chance that internal monologue is focusing on how we feel, what we want to say, potentially defending a position we've already taken or will take, maybe what else or where else we'd rather be going. Our internal monologue, not certainly and not always, but more than likely, is focusing on ourselves, likely how we feel, and taking us away from capturing that intelligence that we're receiving. So in addition to developing a strong sense of curiosity and limiting our internal monologue, it is also creating the capacity to control our emotions. This is a deep conversation that needs to be had at some point. Emotions play a huge role. We'll get back to emotions at another time. But if we allow our emotions to interrupt our ability to truly understand, appreciate, be curious about what other people are sharing and experiencing, then we are falling behind, we're losing, we're communicating from a deficit. Our emotions are valid. I'm not telling anybody ever that they should or shouldn't feel something. That emotion is valid to that person at that time for their reasons, cool. But if we're letting it interrupt how we're receiving, how we're interpreting, how we're retaining, how we're applying the information and intelligence we're getting in a conversation, we're putting ourselves behind. If you've ever found yourself saying or doing something and a second later thinking, man, I wish I could have that back, it's likely because at that moment in time, satisfying your emotion was more important than achieving your outcome. Listening is a goal. Listening is an outcome-oriented exercise. Great listeners develop the capacity to control their emotions. They also have the discipline necessary to limit their distractions. So when we talk about limiting distractions, it's not just turning your cell or ignoring your cell phone. Take it out of your pocket. So that way, if it beeps or vibrates, your brain isn't thinking, what's that? It's not just looking away from your computer, it's shutting it down. If you got super ADD like me, it's turning your back away from the window. So when somebody drives by, you're not looking. It's limiting that internal monologue. It's creating an environment for everybody to be more successful in the conversation. Things might be happening around us. They're not important right now. Let them go. Let's focus on what is important to us. All of these things allow us to begin to create the awareness necessary to uncover hidden value. Part of being an investigative interviewer, and again, having the privilege to participate in so many conversations, one of the things we're often doing is we're collecting puzzle pieces without necessarily knowing what the final picture is going to look like. Some of these puzzle pieces will be useful. A few will be critical. Some will have no value whatsoever, maybe by the end of this investigation, interaction, conversation, whatever it may be. But I have to be collecting this intelligence because there's going to be hidden value somewhere. There's going to be an unexpected connection. There's going to be an unexpected idea, alternative, perspective, something that we can crack open to get this initiative or relationship moving in a new productive direction that nobody saw coming. But if I'm not aware enough to say, let me start hunting for these alternatives in the context of the situation because I'm too distracted. I'm talking to myself. I'm stuck in my emotions. I'm not curious. I think I have it all figured out. Now, there is no way to make progress together. It becomes a binary, finite, win or lose situation. Either I get the thing I came here looking for or I don't, because those are the blinders in the tunnel vision I'm wearing. And maybe the toughest one, and I really believe this comes down to confidence. Great listeners develop the confidence necessary to empathize with people who hold opposing beliefs or perspectives. It's really easy to empathize with people who we have a lot in common with. It's really easy to empathize with people who we agree with or we have same, identical, even similar situations or experience with. But it can be a lot harder to empathize with people who have opposing views, opposing experiences, different ideas. Those can be the ones who are the hardest to empathize with. But we can't learn from them until we do. Empathizing doesn't mean agreeing. In fact, accepting what somebody says and agreeing with them are two different things, and that's developing a new skill in and of itself. If we can begin to understand where other people might be coming from based on their perspective, based on their life, their experience, their expectations, now that level of empathy allows us to open the door to progress in our relationships, in our projects, in our initiatives, whether it's getting them to share sensitive information under vulnerable circumstances in the face of consequences, whether it's getting them to commit to a new behavior, accept another alternative, whatever it might be. So if we really want to develop into great listeners, at least when the chips are down and the conversations are high value, high impact at home and in our professional lives, we want to work on developing that strong sense of curiosity, limiting our internal monologue, controlling our emotions, limiting other distractions, focusing on uncovering hidden value, and developing the confidence to empathize with people who we likely disagree with. That's it. Short list. Even if we just pick one and we start working on one at a time, we will find ourselves in much more productive conversations, outcomes. Honestly, we'll feel less stress. We'll feel less negative emotions. We'll feel more productive. And in the end, we'll save time. For everybody here, leaders in their businesses or business development roles, you've all heard and maybe even said, we've got to invest money to make money. Well, we have to invest time to save time. And often the time we invest listening to others is what saves us more time and creates better outcomes for us down the road. We've already talked about how time is the enemy of empathy. I know many of you don't have more time to spend in your conversations. Great, don't spend more time with people. But make the time you do spend with them feel slower. Because you've all been in a conversation, I've been in a ton of them, where I had to rely on somebody to educate me on something that I had no idea about, very little knowledge about, no experience with. And the faster they talked and the harder they pushed and the more they assumed that I should already know, the more embarrassed I got, the dumber I felt, the more disconnected I felt, the harder it was for them to trust me, and the more the conversation fell apart. It's been said 1,000 times by 1,000 people in 1,000 contexts, slow down to go fast. This is also important because people will interpret how you communicate with them as proof of how much you respect them. People will interpret how you communicate with them as proof of how much you respect them. So by slowing the conversation down, oftentimes by allowing them to even lead the conversation, by really focusing on how do we get enough intelligence from this conversation to create new alternatives to move the relationship and initiative forward, all of these things, it increases the level of trust. It increases the value that we have in the relationship. It makes it easier for people to open up to us. And honestly, in those inevitable conversations where here they are in our office again, it starts reducing the number of those conversations. For great listeners, the value of potentially learning something new outweighs the risks associated with feeling vulnerable. It's not necessarily about winning and losing. It's not about being right or wrong. It's not about being subordinate or being the person in charge. It's about what can I learn today? In fact, a great piece of advice I got from somebody a long time ago that I do before all of my important meetings is because I'm still old school and I should bring a pad of paper with me, not a tablet. At the top of that paper, I will literally write, what did I learn today? I truly believe that if you're going to have a conversation with somebody for at least 5 minutes, maybe even less, and we don't learn something from that conversation, a new perspective, a new thought, a new idea, it doesn't have to be something totally new. But if we don't learn anything at all from that conversation, that's an us problem. That's not a them problem. Listening equals learning. If we're not learning, we're not listening. And if we're not learning and listening, it's likely because we haven't identified an outcome, a result, a goal that we feel is valuable enough to keep us locked in to whatever conversation we're participating in. So there you have it for this week. We have Graham Bodey's research to substantiate why listening is an outcome-oriented process. We have the 6 characteristics of great leaders, a few key concepts to really focus on. Remember that time is the enemy of empathy. Slow down to go fast. We should be limiting our internal monologue to begin with, but also how we frame conversations, what we tell ourselves is going to significantly impact our opportunity to learn from others. I really appreciate you guys coming back week after week. Thank you so very much. Hopefully you got a few notes from this conversation that you can turn around and apply right away. As always, we would be grateful if you subscribe to the show, follow the show, share it with your network, please. We'd love it if you left a review and your feedback. Please let us know what topics you'd like us to talk about in this portion of the show, where we have a lot more to choose from for what topics we dive into, to what level and what context we apply it to. Appreciate you coming back week after week. Thank you so very much. Stay safe, take care of each other, and we'll see you next time.